Today I'm going to talk to you about the freeze response, what it is, how you know you're stuck in the freeze response, what are the symptoms that show up, how it looks like every single day, why it happens in the first place. And in my next video, I'm going to talk to you about different steps and strategies that you can implement to help you get out of the freeze response. So make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so that you don't miss an update. Before we get to talking about the symptoms and what it looks like in everyday life, let's talk about our nervous system so you understand how we get there in the first place. Your autonomic nervous system has two branches. It has the sympathetic branch and it has the parasympathetic branch. The sympathetic branch is responsible for our fight and flight responses. So when there's a threat in our lives, we get mobilized. We get the energy to help us either fight off our threat or run away from our threat. So in everyday life, this can look like restlessness, overworking, lots of anxiety, lots of worries, maybe inability to sit still and focus. The parasympathetic branch of our nervous system is also split up into two separate branches. We have the dorsal vagal branch and the ventral vagal branch. So the dorsal vagal branch is responsible for our shutdown. This is immobilization. So when there's a threat and our parasympathetic branch wasn't able to get us to safety or wasn't able to get us to fight off our threat, then we will go into the dorsal vagal part, which is shut down so that we don't feel too much pain as our threat encounters us. So we might find ourselves dissociating, our body system slows down, heart rate slows down, breathing reduces. This is all in an attempt to keep us from feeling too much pain or even to play dead, essentially, if we were out in the wild, so that our threat doesn't see us as a threat anymore and leaves us alone. But the ventral vagal part of our parasympathetic branch is the part that's responsible for relaxation. This is the part that people talk about. You need to activate your parasympathetic nervous system because it's what calms you down. And this is very true. So this is our rest, digest, learning, joy, connection part of our nervous system. So when we talk about the parasympathetic activation, we're talking about ventral vagal activation. This is the good side of parasympathetic, but dissociation and the freeze response live in the dorsal vagal part, which is again, shut down. So why do we get there in the first place? What happens is we probably have a lot of stress in our lives. We are probably going through a lot. Maybe you've experienced a lot of trauma. Maybe the trauma was chronic or consistent. Maybe you had no way to get out of it. So your body does feel helpless. It feels like there's nothing else I can do here. This is all too overwhelming. And so you naturally start going into that freeze response. One analogy that I've heard that resonated with me, and this is really true for dissociation, but it kind of makes sense for the freeze response as well, is that our body has a natural circuit breaker. So just like your house has a bunch of electricity everywhere, and if you turn on too many things at the same time, if you plug in too many things at the same time, your circuit breaker will take over and shut all the electricity off to protect it from fire. Our nervous system has that too. So when there's so much stress happening in our bodies and so many things going on at once, that is what happens when we go into that freeze response, when we go into that dissociative state. It's our body's natural circuit breaker to keep us from feeling so much overwhelm. It is a survival mechanism, so I know a lot of people get very frustrated that they're here, but this is actually something that is good that your body's doing this, because if you were to feel so much stuff all the time, if you were to stay in that heightened state of anxiety and that sympathetic activation, you probably wouldn't be able to survive. When we're talking about the freeze response, the disorders that make sense under this category include depression, chronic fatigue, anything with executive dysfunction, and dissociative disorders. So what does this look like in everyday life? If you don't have, let's say, a full-blown depressive disorder, full-blown dissociative disorder, but you think you might be stuck in freeze, this is how it shows up. It can show up as extreme fatigue, even though you're getting a lot of sleep. So maybe you're sleeping like 8 or 10 hours a night, but when you wake up, you're still not rested. You still feel like you need more sleep. It could look like you wanting to just like disconnect from the world. So mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours at a time and losing time, maybe binge watching TV shows, but you're not really fully immersed in like paying attention to what's happening in the TV shows. It could be looking for like low tension TV shows, like reality shows, because they tend to not take a lot of mental focus and just kind of take you out of your own life. You might have a really difficult time making simple decisions. We're not just talking about these big decisions like which house to buy. We're talking about, what do I eat for breakfast? Like, nothing sounds good. I'm not craving anything. I don't know what shirt to wear. I don't know what TV show to. So like you get fatigued from even thinking about making a simple decision. You wish that everybody else could just like choose for you and you can just go with the flow. You might notice a lot of procrastination. A lot of times you're putting things off, even simple tasks. Another way that this shows up is like when you're driving, you get places and you're like, how did I even get here? I don't even remember how I got here. I'm so disconnected that I'm just kind of on autopilot throughout my life. I don't feel like I'm me. So again, it could come in the forms of emotional, physical numbness. It can come in the forms of dissociation. So this is when you feel completely disconnected from yourself or your surroundings. Things just feel off. You don't feel like you're yourself. And finally, it can also look like just an overall sense of not caring about anything. Sometimes it even concerns you that you don't care, but sometimes you're like, whatever. Like, honestly, it's like that meh, flat affect. So as you can see, a lot of these symptoms do sound like what we described: depression and dissociation, and even some parts of like ADHD, the executive dysfunction, right? And this is because all of these do live in that dorsal vagal part of our parasympathetic nervous system, in that shutdown state. So for people with depression, they've probably just been going on for such a long time with these symptoms that it just feels impossible to change it. People with dissociation have probably experienced so much trauma in their past that it feels dangerous to be here in the present moment, because your nervous system doesn't know what to expect and is trying to keep you protected. For people with ADHD, it's so much overwhelm in the world. So there's so much going on all the time, and we constantly feel that we're in a state of exhaustion and uncertainty that our nervous system goes in here and creates that executive dysfunction. Things seem impossible to do. So it doesn't really matter what disorder you have or don't have, the freeze response can happen to anyone. The thing about the freeze response is that people tell me, I need to get out of this. One of the issues with that is that you're causing a lot more stress in your nervous system when you're so focused on just trying to get out of it, and you're not able to, because it's not a simple task. Remember that we get stuck in the freeze response because things have been going on for way too long, at way too high of an intensity, and our system is overwhelmed. So giving it one more thing, like even trying to get out of the freeze response and making it a priority or putting that much pressure on yourself, can make it so much worse. But of course, there are so many things that you can do. It does require consistency and time. And as I promised, in my next video, I'm going to go over some tools that I talk about with my clients, that I implement with my clients, that I implement with myself, that do help you get out of the freeze response. So make sure that you're subscribed. Let me know what your thoughts on this video. Did you learn anything about the freeze response? Does this sound like something that you struggle with? Drop them in the comment box below and stay tuned for my next video.